There, okay. All right, so we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our legislative wrap-up discussion. I'm Julie Mayfield. I'm one of the co-directors at MountainTrue, and with me here today are two folks, Gray Jernigan, who is our Southern Regional Director and our Green River Keeper, and then also our lobbyist, contract lobbyist in Raleigh, Rob Lamme.
From my kitchen.
From his kitchen, that's right. I'm from my living room, and Gray is from his family's house in Raleigh. So we're all over the place.
Bunker.
So what we want to do today is talk to you just a little bit about, big picture, we're going to share sort of about MountainTrue's work in the legislature over the last couple of sessions, what we've accomplished, what we were trying to accomplish. But then to get there, what I also want to do is just step back a little bit and remind people about why we do this work and how we do this work. So we, several years ago, we realized at MountainTrue that there was not anybody at the legislature who was advocating for Western North Carolina. There are a number of statewide environmental organizations that do incredibly good advocacy work at the legislature every year, but they are not particularly focused on Western North Carolina. And so, sometimes MountainTrue would get pulled into those conversations, but what we realized is that, we need an agenda, a legislative agenda for Western North Carolina. The people, I think, either don't know or don't realize how impactful the legislature is to the entire state and to our region, and particularly with regard to creating environmental policy, funding environmental programs. Different portions of the state are different. And if we're not advocating that the mountains that we get our fair share of funding that's being allocated by the legislature, or that the policies that apply here maybe need to be different because of our terrain and our ecosystems, nobody's going to do that for us. So a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we started working with Rob initially just to help us with our communications. And we thought, well, we're going to be able to build relationships with our legislators and do this lobbying thing kind of by ourselves on our own. We started taking some trips to Raleigh and during the session, and we pretty quickly realized that was not going to do it. If you've ever done any legislative advocacy work, you know how quickly things can move inside the building, how quickly bills can change, how quickly, you literally within a 5-minute period can go from supporting a bill to opposing a bill. If you're not there, right there, as budget negotiations are happening, you can just miss out on opportunities. And the relationships that you have, not just with legislators, but also with legislative staff, become incredibly important in trying to accomplish what you want to do. And we just couldn't do that effectively sitting in Asheville, really, even with the trips we were making to Raleigh. So at that point, we obviously knew Rob very well. Rob is a lobbyist for a number of environmental organizations, including sort of what I think of as our sister organization on the coast, the North Carolina Coastal Federation. We're both fortunate to, in my view, kind of lobby and advocate for protection of the two jewels of North Carolina, the mountains and the coast. And Rob has been doing that work with the Coastal Federation for a long time. And so he was, for me, the logical person to come work with us. So with Rob on board and being in the building every day, our effectiveness at legislative advocacy just really elevated tremendously. And we still do monthly trips to Raleigh, a few of us on staff. When they're in session, we set up a full day of visits with our legislators, sometimes also with state agency officials while we're there, or the governor's staff, whoever we need to see to be effective, to effectively advocate for the things that we're asking for. We also take time to build relationships with our legislators in district. So we will meet with our legislators when they're not in Raleigh. in their offices and their hometowns. And we have also done things like held candidate forums when we've had open seats in the legislature in Western North Carolina. We'll bring the competing candidates together for a conversation around the environment and give our members a chance to meet those folks. And that really helps us build relationships with with both of those candidates, so that whoever wins, we're well positioned already to go talk to them in Raleigh. And so we do have, through all of that work, we have good relationships with we sort of consider it kind of a 15-member delegation. We have 10 House members from Western North Carolina, 5 senators. They all know who we are. They all take our meetings. Again, Rob is there on the ground on a daily basis to be our voice for them. Now, the key thing that guides our work every year in the session is our legislative agenda. So every fall, before the session begins, we take time to develop a legislative agenda. And that is, just what is it that we're going to try to accomplish in the legislature over the next couple of years. So each legislative session is 2 years, not just 1, but 2. And so we sort of, what is it that we want to do, that we want to see done in the legislature in the next couple of years. And I'm going to flip it over to Gray to talk a little bit more about that and to share with you our legislative agenda from the 2019-2020 session, and then sort of how that process works. And then Gray is going to pitch it to Rob to then talk about our accomplishments in that legislative agenda, and sort of last year and this year. And then Rob is also going to give us a little bit of a future look into what the legislature might look like based on a couple of different outcomes from the election this fall. So with that, I will stop and pitch it to Gray to talk a little bit more about our legislative agenda.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Gray Jernigan. I'm the Southern Regional Director and Green Riverkeeper with MountainTrue, and also a member of our legislative advocacy team. I think Julie provided a really good synopsis of kind of how we work in the legislative arena. And one thing I really wanted to highlight is the nonpartisan nature of our organization and the nonpartisan nature of our lobbying. So we work with legislators from any political party, from any political philosophy, and we really try to find common ground. In Western North Carolina, everybody has some environmental ethic. We're all in Western North Carolina because it's a beautiful place to live and the quality of life we enjoy here. But we have to recognize that each legislator has a different set of priorities that they take to Raleigh. And one of our jobs, in addition to that relationship building, is kind of elevating environmental issues on that priority list to make sure that our interests are front and center in the legislature. And so we also hold our legislators accountable, and that's in terms of praise and criticisms and support. And so, we're equal opportunity on all of those, regardless of your political persuasion. So further toward our legislative agenda, we're looking at the makeup of the General Assembly, kind of what the appetite for legislation is with the current makeup. And you'll notice I'll share our legislative agenda in just a moment, but when we're looking for priorities and opportunities, Julie mentioned several things: funding opportunities and policy opportunities. Recently, we've seen a lot more opportunities in the funding side in terms of getting things included in the state budget, and a lot more challenging to pass protective and proactive policies in the environmental sector. So that'll kind of explain some of how our legislative agenda is formed. I'm going to share my screen right now and show you kind of what our conservation investments have been for the 2019-2020 session. And this is kind of revised for the short session that we just came through. Julie mentioned that it's a 2-year cycle in the legislature, starting with the long session in 2019, and we just came through the short session of 2020, but technically a singular legislative session. We started these conversations 2 years ago before the 2019 session and can carry them through now. And I'll just kind of talk through some of the priorities that we set forward and why we went this direction. I mentioned the opportunities for funding being kind of the low-hanging fruit here. And so most of these are budget items that we've advocated to include in various bills and in the overall state budget. The first thing on the list is a fund with DEQ to address hazardous waste spills from unknown sources. This came out of an incident we experienced on the Watauga River where we had a petroleum spill that could not immediately be tied to an underground storage tank. And there's a fund available to address underground storage tank leaks, but if it can't immediately be tied to that kind of source, there wasn't a fund available to facilitate that response. So we've lobbied for a fund to respond to spills of unknown sources. We also look at improving public access, and particularly an opportunity in the Green River game lands that we've been advocating for. We also we do a great deal of bacteria sampling all across Western North Carolina for recreational water quality, for human health, for people swimming in the river that might be exposed to bacteria pollution. And we've requested funding to support that work and for some further work to advance tracking the sources of those so that we can put a stop to bacteria pollution in waters that are used for recreation. We also, again, toward the public access and tourism and economic development around recreational water resources, we've included in here investments to the French Broad River Paddle Trail, which is a great recreational amenity here covering 5 counties in Western North Carolina. Again, including access and habitat on the Watauga River. We are engaged in a dam removal project that is moving forward, but we requested the legislature's help in funding the removal of that dam on the Watauga River. And similarly, the Watauga River Paddle Trail to expand tourism and investment and recreation in the high country. Some of the bigger pollution problems we see is from agricultural pollution, and recognizing that farmers are often in a tight place when it comes to making improvements or installing best management practices on their operations. We've requested additional funding, which is earmarked to Western North Carolina to support farmers in making those improvements through cost share programs and similar types of grant programs. Another program that we'd like to see refunded is the WADE program. That's the Wastewater Discharge Elimination Program, which was wildly successful until the program was defunded about 10 years ago. But before that time, this was looking at stopping sewer, mostly straight pipes, sewer straight pipes across the region that are still around in rural areas of the mountain counties. And the program was successful in stopping over 2,000 direct discharges of sewage into mountain waters. So we'd like to see that program refunded. We also asked for funding for the Community Conservation Assistance Program, which is technical assistance to homeowners and property owners to reduce runoff and other sources of property pollution. So that's kind of an overview. We're really looking at this from a holistic perspective and looking at different types of programs that can help protect water quality all across the region and also promote our water resources for the use of the public. Before I turn it over to Rob, I just want to highlight that we have been very successful in building the relationships with our local delegation and getting some of these priorities put forward. And Rob can kind of explain the nuts and bolts of how the legislature has responded to some of our requests and some of the accomplishments and challenges that we've experienced over the years. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Rob.
Thanks. I want to talk a little bit about the development of this agenda. I think Gray kind of alluded to it, but you know, this is that when you draft a legislative agenda for a particular legislature, you're taking, I think, three things. You're taking what you want to get done, right? So we're assessing the resource, our resource needs, like, if let loose in a political or environmental candy store, what would we ask for what would we want to get done to improve water quality and reduce air pollution and develop more responsibly in Western North Carolina? And then what kind of General Assembly do we have, and which of those items would be received most, would be most likely to be received positively? And also, what kind of support could we find on other stakeholders, or what kind of opposition are we going to generate? And then, what kind of budget situation do we have? What are the state's resources? So, as you probably know, as a result of the pandemic, the state's finances are really in disorder right now. And so, if we had been facing the kind of budget situation in the lead up to the 2019 session that we're facing now, the choices that we would have made in that agenda might be very different. It's also based on, frankly, who's in the legislature in Western North Carolina, and who do we have good relationships with, and who have the committee assignments and, frankly, the push in the General Assembly to help us. And in Western North Carolina, you're very fortunate to have two Western North Carolina legislators who are in key positions to make, to approve and shape the state budget as it relates to natural and economic resources. That's Chuck McGrady in Henderson County, who's a senior appropriations chair. And then Chuck Edwards, who's also from Henderson County, just coincidentally, we refer to them as the two Chucks. And they are really, really key appropriators on natural and economic resources. And we have particularly strong relationships with them. And we haven't agreed with them on everything, but they have been willing to, meet us more than halfway on a number of these appropriations. And so it's all of that that goes into the mix of what do we ask for. And then, it's Gray and Julie's job to sort of figure all that out. It's kind of my job to help them figure out, okay, how do we talk about this in the context of the legislature in a manner that the particular lawmakers that we have will be more likely to say yes. And then calculations like when do we reach out to folks at the grassroots level to pound away via email or calls, when do we want to stand back? And then the other thing that's not on this legislative agenda is that there are many issues that come up that aren't on our agenda but are central to what MountainTrue stands for, like clean energy policy or improved water quality regulation. And unfortunately, in this legislature in the recent years, we've been doing a lot of defense on those kinds of topics. And so it's also my job, in coordination with the MountainTrue folks and with your help at the grassroots level, to speak up when the General Assembly starts moving bills to do, for example, multi-year building for Duke Energy, which we spent a lot of time opposing, and along with many, many other groups, and we're able to defeat, or billboard bills, or those kinds of things. So that's another part of MountainTrue's work that may not be represented here. This is the offense that you see. We play a lot of defense, probably more defense than we play offense, to be perfectly honest, in recent years. So I want to talk about that agenda. We started that, frankly, as Grace said, almost 2 years ago. It would have been the fall of 2018 where we sat down and sort of decided what we were going to do. And then, of course, in odd-numbered years, the General Assembly goes into session in January and traditionally meets into the summer. We don't have session limits in North Carolina, but we traditionally get out in the summer. And then in even-numbered years, like this year, they go into session in May, and then historically get out. Again, there are no limits on the short session, so they get out sometime in the summertime. And because, for a lot of different reasons, in recent years, we've had these kind of rolling special sessions where the General Assembly, frankly, never really goes out of session. which can provide a lot of opportunity, but also can be kind of quite maddening. We are now out of session. We've just finished the meat of the 2020 session. We'll go back into session on very briefly, hopefully on September 2nd, to clean up some issues related to the state's COVID response, and to appropriate any dollars that Congress might appropriate in the next few weeks in the second round of the federal response to the epidemic. That's kind of where we are. We've had a unique, pandemic aside, leaving the pandemic aside for just a second, which is like uniquely unique, if that's the phrase. We've had a really, really interesting couple of years because, of course, we have a Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, and we've had a legislature that's controlled by the opposition party, the Republicans. And in the first 2 years of Cooper's tenure as governor, the Republicans had veto-proof majorities, which meant that if they could come to agreement about what they wanted to do, they really didn't need to worry about whether the governor was going to sign a bill or not, including the budget. But in 2018, of course, the Republicans lost the veto-proof majorities in both chambers. They're very narrow. I mean, but for a couple of Democrats, they could override the governor. But the Democrats have sort of stayed together. Cooper's been able to keep them together, and as a result, in 2019 and again 2020, Cooper became a much bigger factor in the legislative process because all of a sudden his veto was sticking. And as I'm sure you probably know, we got stuck. That political dynamic happened on the biggest bill of the year, which is the state budget. It's a $24 billion budget if you just count state revenues. If you add federal revenues like Medicaid and other investments, it quickly swells to over $50 billion. And the General Assembly, we were very successful in the General Assembly last year. Most of the priorities that were included in the list that Gray just showed you were actually included in the budget. We had as good a budget year as we'd ever had, with the likes of Chuck McGrady and Chuck Edwards, and not just investments in new capacity at DEQ, and not just investments in like powder shells, but for the first time, we got a Republican legislature to make a direct appropriation to MountainTrue, which is kind of like the Hatfields investing in the McCoys. I'm being flippant about that, but getting this legislature to provide direct funding to an environmental organization that is regularly and consistently quite critical of its environmental policies was quite an accomplishment, I thought, and a testament to the work that MountainTrue's been doing around that investment is to do increased water quality testing, largely in the French Broad, and we were able to show the Republicans, Chuck Edwards, Chuck McGrady, and some others, that there was a significant public health risk in the French Broad. All of those folks who are paddling in the summertime and floating in the French Broad, as all of you know, if they do that a day or two after it rains, they are swimming in soup of some pretty nasty stuff. And we were able to document that. The Asheville Citizen-Times started running that stuff on a regular basis. And even though that's been going on for a really long time, all of a sudden there was a lot more public conversation about that. And we were able to go to the General Assembly and make the argument that this was not just a public health risk, but it was also an economic development issue, because water quality and water recreation has become such a huge part of Western North Carolina's summer economy, fall economy for that matter, and we brought outfitters into the conversation who rely on water quality for their businesses, and really demonstrated to them that we really needed to get a handle on this water quality issue. And so we had most of the investments in water quality that we wanted the legislature to make. They actually got made. That was great. Unfortunately, we're a small boat in a very, very, very big political ocean, and we couldn't solve the stalemate between the legislature and the governor, which was over much larger issues. And so even though we got so close and we got in the budget, Governor Cooper, and I don't begrudge him the veto because there were very, very important, there are other issues. He vetoed the budget, and then they were not able to come to an agreement. And so we were stuck, right? We came so close. And then, of course, we started all over again. In the fall of 2018, we started having the same conversations with legislators to thank them for what they did in their budget, and then to try to tee all of that up for 2020. And we're largely able to. I felt really, really, really good about where we were positioned until about, March, when this thing called the coronavirus hit. The state's finances quickly started to collapse, and rather than hearing from legislators, oh yeah, we definitely want to try to help, they went from that to saying we don't really know if we have any money at all. And they were facing a $4 to $5 billion deficit, and still are. We're still waiting to see what the state's revenues were. So all of a sudden then we can have a much different environment, and we have no guarantee that the governor's going to sign another budget. Indeed, he did not. And in fact, the legislature didn't even waste time on doing a budget this year because they knew the governor wasn't going to sign it. And so they did a series of mini budget bills, and we tried to stay in constant contact with Chuck Edwards and with Chuck McGrady and others, as well as at our grassroots. And we were able to get the appropriation for water quality. That's the direct appropriation to MountainTrue, which I judge to be the most challenging of the requests that we made. And then we were also able to get the additional funding for DEQ, which of all the state agencies in the state's umbrella of regulatory agencies, DEQ is the least favorite at the General Assembly. But despite that, they were willing to make this discrete increase in appropriation to increase the agency's capacity to respond to oil spills of undetermined origin. So that's what we ended up with at the General Assembly. I judge that as a tremendous victory because of the impact that the COVID had on the budget, the fact that there really wasn't a budget at all. We had a very abbreviated session because legislators frankly wanted to get in and get out. I think we were very, very fortunate. I'm very proud of the work that we did. And I just want to say, I mean, I'm a member of MountainTrue. My business supports MountainTrue. I know what it takes to have representation full-time at the legislature. And so it's for folks like you who support MountainTrue, really that work, your investment and your contributions and your support of MountainTrue allows us to do the work to have that presence in the General Assembly. And it can take a long time, and it's imperfect, right? I mean, in a perfect world, we would be talking about increasing regulations or making it harder to do something about the sources of this pollution, which is a lot of agricultural runoff, and it's municipal systems that need upgrading and need resources, and it's frankly tougher rules and tougher enforcement. And that's something that we haven't been able to convince this General Assembly to do because they're really, really loath to do it. So I don't want to overstate our success. I mean, we have not been able to be successful there, and I frankly don't think that's our fault. That's a function of the political environment that we have and the choices that the folks have made, that elected the folks that sent these legislators have made. So that's kind of in the Reader's Digest version of the 2020 session. I'm going to stop and ask my boss here, Julie Mayfield, if there's anything she would like me to add, and then I'll do that, and then I'll talk a little bit about the 2021 political environment and how we're going to get prepared for 2021, because that is also quite unique.
Yeah. So thanks, Rob. That was a great summary. Just to put some numbers on it, what we were able to get in the budget in 2019 was about $750,000 worth of investment mostly in Western North Carolina, within this sort of $200,000 chunk going to DEQ that could be spent anywhere in the state. we ended up with $300,000 that we got this year. 100 is the direct appropriation to MountainTrue, and then the 200 to DEQ. So just to so we lost some in between 2019 and 2020, but as Rob says, we feel incredibly lucky that we got anything in this year of just really budget collapse, as I think he said. So we're very proud of that. And just to sort of go back in history a little bit, as Rob says, these things take a long time. So we have been talking to the legislature about some of these things for quite a while. We did, just to Rob, to correct one thing that you said, I think in 2018, we actually did get a $20,000 allocation from the General Assembly
I'm sorry.
to specifically study whirling disease in
Whirling
trout.
disease. I'm very proud of that, Julie.
And that was a very small, a very small allocation. $20,000 is, I mean, it's not even pocket change in the state budget. And we really have Senator Deanna Ballard up in Watauga County to thank for that, because that's one of the places across the state that we've seen whirling disease. And we are in the process of doing a study on whirling disease throughout Western North Carolina that we'll get the report on that pretty soon. And then in the session, I think right before that in 2017, we had our first real legislative victory from a budget standpoint that refunded the landslide hazard mapping program to the tune of about $3.5 million. And that is a program that got started back in the mid 2000s. There were several counties mapped, and then the legislature killed the program. They defunded the program. But we thought it was important to refund that program, particularly in the wake of the increasingly violent storms and the storms that we're seeing out here that really were causing a huge number of landslides and additional people dying. And so, again, we worked very closely with Chuck McGrady specifically on that legislation to move it forward, and got that funding. So the mapping has now started again, and they're mapping all the counties in Western North Carolina. So
yeah, the thinking there, of course, is you map. The maps show the risk, and then once you have that data, appropriate and sustainable development practices follow it. So
yeah.
It's not just about public safety; it's also about creating the momentum for responsible development in those
for policy change. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's just a little sort of brief history of the budgetary successes that we've had. There have been other, as Rob says, we've played defense on a lot of policy initiatives, and we've won some of those and we've lost some of those. We don't need to talk about all of that right now, but from my perspective as someone, as the staff person sort of leading this program right now, we are achieving success in what we're trying to do. Again, sometimes it takes a long time, but we're making a difference for Western North Carolina. And I do just want to make the point that we are the only environmental group in Western North Carolina making this kind of investment in the legislature. There isn't any other environmental group in this region that has the full-time presence in Raleigh that we do in the form of Rob. There are certainly other groups out here. Appalachian Voices is present at the legislature on some issues, but we are the voice for Western North Carolina's environment at the legislature. And as Rob says, we can't do that without the support of our members, and so we really appreciate that. It's this program sort of overall cost us, in the $40,000 to $45,000 range every year, so it doesn't come cheap, but we think it's worth it. It's a little bit of investment for us, and then we get several $100,000 worth of return to the region, and that's really important. So with that,
I also want to say, it's also, $750,000 is a lot of money for us, but in the context of the state budget, $24 billion, but particularly in the context of the conservation and environmental need that the region faces, it's a very, very modest investment. And, we have a long way to go to convince folks in Raleigh that to make the proper investments, both in regulatory policy as well as in appropriations in conservation. I just want to acknowledge that, because you hear $750,000 and we think, great, right? And that's an accomplishment. There's no way around it. But in terms of the need, we're way behind. Let me talk about 2020 really, really fast, because it's not, it just poses a very interesting situation, because, as I'm sure all of you know, there is, among the punditocracy in this state, there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen in North Carolina with the gubernatorial race. Maybe less, I think most conventional wisdom right now anyway, is that the governor's going to get reelected. We'll see if that's true or not. But what's also in play, and what's much, much more difficult to have any real insight into until after the returns are actually made, is where the legislature's going. The majorities are very, very narrow, and depending upon how the election goes, we could have the same legislature next year. We could have one or both of the chambers move from the Republican side to the Democratic side. And what's important, and that's important for us, because we have to start having conversations with legislators, not in November and December about what they're going to do in January, although we'll do that. We have to start having conversations with them in September and October and November and December to set up the conversation for 2021. And that's particularly true if you think, as I do, that there is a reasonable chance, I don't know how to calculate that, but there is a reasonable chance that one or more of the chambers will switch political parties. And that means that there are going to be people in the Democratic caucuses in Western North Carolina who are going to end up in leadership positions. And if that happens, the day after the election, there is going to be a gold rush, and I do mean a gold rush, of every special interest in the state going to the 20 or so members who have seniority in the legislature in those chambers, and giving them their list of things that they want them to do. And so it's really important that we have those conversations well before the election, so that if the Brian Turners and other members of the Western North Carolina delegation, I don't mean Susan Fisher and others, who have a lot of seniority and who are capable legislators, but who have been sort of left out of the decision-making process because they're in the minority party, if they get in the majority party, they are going to be very influential. And it's going to be to MountainTrue and to Western North Carolina's benefit that they're going to be there, but it's going to be hard to get their attention. So we are preparing not one, but frankly, two legislative agendas for 2021. The one that we talk to a certain group of members about in the event that the legislature changes, and then a different legislative agenda that is kind of built more for the legislature we have now. And so our work is doubled. We have to have two sets of agendas depending upon who we're talking to, and we have to have that many more meetings between September and January. And we have to have that many more conversations with our constituent and our stakeholder groups to help us, the businesses folks that we work with, our grassroots folks, maybe some of the MountainTrue members who are very close to some of these legislators who we can go to and ask them to help us broker those conversations or to echo the requests that we're making. So all of that work is we're starting to have those conversations right now, putting together those packages. And then after Labor Day, we will start marching through the Western North Carolina delegation, including members who may be running in open seats, even before they get elected, to sit down with them and sort of say, hey, if you're chosen by the voters to represent this neck of the woods, here's what our members in your district have to say about what we'd like you to carry forward in 2021. So that work is already started. And again, we'll march through January when they get in session, and then we'll march all the way through into the summer in what I think is going to be a very, very long and very difficult session because of the budget situation, Unfortunately, I think we all know that the challenges of the pandemic are going to continue to be with us. The budget situation is going to be very, very difficult. And we could have a whole new political dynamic in new leadership in one or both of the chambers. So the work never stops. And particularly in 2021, I think it's going to be really, really a critical year. And we could also, even if Cooper doesn't get reelected, we could see turnover in some of the leadership in some of the key agencies, like the Department of Environmental Quality. We do a lot of face-to-face work with the agency that has nothing to do with the legislature. And if we have new leadership in the Secretary's office, that's more relationship building and reintroducing MountainTrue to whomever that person is, and figuring out what their priorities are, and figuring out how their priorities might match up with something that we want them to do, and how do we get all of that to work together to advantage, natural resources and the quality of life in Western North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to stop there, but that gives you a sense of sort of the work that we do behind the scenes, even when legislators are not in session, to get ready for when they are.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. Why don't we open it up to questions now? So if people have questions, you can put it either in the Q&A. I guess in the Q&A is where we want to see those. And while folks might be doing that, let me just mention that if certainly on the House side, if Democrats do retake the majority, we have one of the more senior Democratic legislators from our region. Susan Fisher has been in the North Carolina House for about 18 years. So she is literally probably in the top 3 and will undoubtedly have a leadership position, which again will be very helpful for Western North Carolina. People might be interested, the political split in our delegation, there are, I believe there are 10 Republicans and 5 Democrats across our region. Some of those Democrats now do have some seniority. They've been there maybe 8 years, but Susan Fisher, Representative Susan Fisher, is far out in front. And she, again, if Democrats do retake the House, she will be a great champion for the environment. But as Rob says, it's very close in both chambers, and so we have to prepare. We have to prepare for both, and that is what we will do.
I was going to say, I'm also interested from the folks who signed up, whether you are hearing what you wanted to hear about, and there's something that you came to us this afternoon to talk about that you didn't hear about. We're happy to wade in on anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, and again, I'll just make the point, and you can probably tell this from Gray's walking you through our legislative agenda, that our legislative agenda comes directly out of our work in this region. One of the great things about MountainTrue is we do work across the region. We work, literally from Murphy to Boone. We work on a variety of issues, from clean energy to water to public lands to land use, transportation. And so our work informs what we know we need from the legislature and what we know we need from state agencies. So it's all very directly connected. Everything that we ask the legislature for is directly responsive to problems that we are seeing in our work and our ability to affect change in the region on behalf of the environment and the communities here. So, what I would say to folks who are watching this is, if there are issues that you are seeing that MountainTrue is either not working on or we're not aware of, or that haven't risen to the level of our legislative agenda, feel free to reach out to us to talk about those. As Rob said at the beginning of his talk, what ends up on our legislative agenda is a result of a complicated sifting process. So it's not everything we want. It has to do with, what do we think the General Assembly will be receptive to? Do we have legislators in powerful enough positions who can carry those issues for us and will carry those issues for us? So there are things that fall, you know, we sort of, it's a big bucket. You know, we start with or it's a funnel. You know, we start with a lot of issues that we would like to see the legislature address, and then it funnels down through those different filters to the list that Gray put up earlier. But all that to say,
some questions.
Okay, great. Let's get to them.
Should I just read them, or who's going to do that?
Sure, Rob. Why don't you do that?
This is from Hannah. How can we, as voters, help support MountainTrue's efforts?
I can take a first shot at that, Rob. And thank you for the question, Hannah. First of all, I just want to reiterate that we're nonpartisan and we don't endorse candidates or do any kind of electioneering activity, but we do very much encourage our members and all the citizens in Western North Carolina to vote. So just getting to the polls is a great first step in casting your ballot. And aside from that, research the candidates in your area, ask them questions, and make sure that they know that the environment is a top priority for you as a voter. The more voters that they hear from that the environment is their top priority, the more support and political cover they know that they have from their electorate. You know, really just asking the candidates their positions on certain issues, getting educated, and educating the people in your community through mouth and other types of efforts, and turning out the vote. So,
and I'm going to take a slightly broader or expansive take on that question. I would also think, like, after they get elected, you know, I think people don't understand exactly how accessible these legislators are. They have very little staff. They have no district offices. They don't have any staff in their districts. And so it's literally possible, it's very, very possible just to email them and say, hey, I'm in your district. I want to come and have a coffee, meet you for a cup of coffee. And then if you do that and you want us to come along, you want Gray to join you or Julie to join you, or if you just want to take our legislative agenda or some of our work with you and sit down to a 30-minute coffee with your legislator and just say, hey, I'm in your district and I'm really concerned about the environment. I'm a MountainTrue member, and here's what I think, you know, here's what the folks that I rely on around these issues think should be a priority, and they're a priority for me. And, you know, please let us know if hope these are self-explanatory, but if you have any questions, let us know. And then just keep pinging them. Just keep sending them keep talk with us, email us, and start building that relationship. It's very, very simple. It's really, it doesn't take very long. And if you meet with somebody, I guarantee you, if you meet with a legislator for 30 minutes before session or during session or early in the session, and then you continue to call and sort of, they're going to know who you are, and it's very easy to have a kind of outsized, outsized impact on some of these legislators. Should we go to another question, Julie?
Sure. I like the second one about why do we have such a low budget overall.
Okay, I'll let you go to that.
That's probably a you question.
Okay, so my government affairs work is solely focused on state of North Carolina. So if it's the case that North Carolina does not spend as much money as our surrounding states, I will take your word for that. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I'll take your word for it. You know, this is a double-edged sword. Since the Republicans have taken over the legislature in 2011, the easiest thing and nothing's easy, but relatively speaking, the thing that is easier to get these legislators or these general assemblies to invest in are simple, straightforward conservation investments, like new parks or open space conservation, like the new park that the General Assembly is starting to fund in Buncombe County. I mean, now the Republican legislature did that, and that's because, you know, parks and open space and clean water and recreational opportunities, those are the easiest part of the environmental agenda for conservative legislators to support, right? And they're also very, very popular. There's nothing controversial about a new state park, right? But when you get into increasing regulation on small businesses or on farmers, or making it harder to develop or more expensive because you want to improve water quality, then all of a sudden you're hitting somebody, you're hitting somebody, you're goring somebody's ox, and they start speaking up. And I think it's no surprise, it's no secret that the Republican Party is much less enthusiastic about government regulation than their counterparts. At the same time, in terms of the investment in the environment, this part of that is a revenue issue. This legislature, or since 2011, has regularly cut taxes. You don't need me to tell you that. As a way of limiting or reducing the size of government. And so when the pie gets smaller, the pieces for everybody get smaller, and it gets harder and harder to find new resources or additional resources for important investments. That's part of it. And then also, I think, I'm not sure that Republicans always, this is different in Western North Carolina, where clean water and the mountains are so tied to the state's economy, where folks in the Republican Party, Republican members, understand that their stewardship of those resources is directly connected to jobs. But that's not really true in other parts of the state. And we don't have as much we have fewer natural allies outside of the maybe the coast, where folks understand the need, the tie between a clean natural resources and the state's economy, and also in Western North Carolina. But that's not true overall in the General Assembly. Or making that argument is harder, particularly when resources are few and far between. And then finally, and I have to say, I think this is, Chuck McGrady is really insightful about the way in which the environmental community has not been able to build allies inside the Republican caucuses. We've been able to do that with McGrady. He's a former Sierra Club president. If you can't do it with him, you're not going to ever be able to do it with any Republican. But we've also been able to do it with Chuck Edwards, who's a very, very conservative, traditionally conservative Republican. But I'm not sure we have, as a group, as an environmental community, spent enough time really thinking hard about what we can get Republicans to say yes to. And that's partly their responsibility, obviously, because we've asked, but I think it's also, it speaks to the need to continue to think about how those of us who are concerned about the environment can, how we talk to and how we build bridges with folks who are not our natural allies. So yeah. I think that's part of it. That's a long conversation, but I think that's a start of an answer.
Yeah, and Rob, that sort of partially answers the next question from Betsy about, why have we focused so much on water and not so much on solar and energy? And Betsy, the answer to that simply is because our legislators out here, as Rob said, water is an easy issue for them because it's so intricately tied to our economy here. The other reason, particularly on issues like climate and energy and solar, is that the legislature has essentially been deadlocked on energy issues for almost a decade. There was finally a bill that went through, a pretty comprehensive bill that went through in, I think, 2018, that was, a long time in the making, and very hard fought, and sort of made everybody mad, which probably means it ended up in the only place it could end up. But again, the legislature has not been in a place to make what I think we would consider really progressive energy policy. And so it doesn't mean that we're not working on it. We actually have, I think energy is going to be a bigger part of our agenda going forward, but it hasn't been a place that we have felt we could be influential in moving things forward so far. So we haven't done that.
I would also say, I would say that I just, on those energy bills, we've been engaged. The other thing is that's a very crowded political space. There are a lot of environmental groups that are wading into those issues. And you know, we're a small boat in a big ocean, and so you want to pick your battles and you want to, and so we've echoed, you know, we've been good team members on many of those issues, all of those issues. But we have also reserved a good deal of our political bandwidth for stuff that's very, very particular to Western North Carolina.
That's right.
So that's part of it as well.
And Betsy, in answer to your other question, I mean, we're happy, you know, we've recorded this webinar. You're welcome to show it to your group, but we're also happy to talk to you about, you know, whether Gray or I can come out and do a presentation, or our regional director who is sort of works in Haywood County, Callie Moore. Happy to talk to you about that. Why don't you just reach out to me separately after this, Julie at MountainTrue.org, and we'll get that conversation started.
Yeah, we're glad.
Go ahead, Greg.
Glad to hear you're working similarly to the Citizens Concerned with the Climate Crisis group in Henderson County. I've worked closely with them over the years, and happy to see the same thing is evolving in Haywood County. We love your support there.
Right.
And I'm happy to, I've been out in person to some of those communities. You know, hopefully that will be possible sometime soon, but if there's other ways that we can contribute, if only to, you know, if you're thinking about meeting with a legislator and you want to talk to somebody about what their track record is or some suggestions about the best way to approach them, what works, what doesn't work, we're happy to help you with that. I'm personally happy to help you with that.
Yeah, great. So there are no more questions and we are at our time. So I think we will wrap it up. Thanks everybody for attending, and thank you, Rob, for joining us and offering your wisdom, and Gray as well. Just so folks know, the legislative work at MountainTrue is going to be kind of transitioning from me managing that program to Gray. So you'll be seeing more of Gray in the future, leading these discussions. But the constant will be Rob and the great work that he does for us, and we're very appreciative of that. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.